At my son Daniel's lavish birthday party, his wife Brooke smirked, calling me just another mouth to feed. My own son, for whom I sacrificed everything, simply laughed along. I quietly found a corner. Then, a stranger handed me an envelope that revealed I was about to become a millionaire. This is just the beginning of my story. Please like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. Eleanor smoothed the skirt of her modest, if a little worn, dress, feeling an all too familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Tonight was Daniel's 30th birthday, a milestone that should have been filled with warmth and genuine celebration. Instead, as she stepped into the opulent ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel, she felt less like a beloved mother and more like a required attendance, an obligation begrudgingly fulfilled. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low murmur of affluent conversation, a world starkly different from her quiet suburban life. She hoped, against her better judgment, for a moment of connection with her son, a reminder of the bond they once shared. She moved tentatively through the room, her eyes taking in the glittering chandeliers, the meticulously arranged floral displays, and the array of impeccably dressed guests. Each face seemed to exude an air of self-importance and detached politeness. Daniel's wife, Brooke, moved among them like a queen surveying her court. Her smile a practiced, unyielding curve, Brooke's expensive gown shimmered, and her eyes, though captivating, held a calculating chill Eleanor had come to know all too well. Every gesture Brooke made, every word she uttered, seemed orchestrated, designed to impress and subtly assert her position at the pinnacle of this social hierarchy. Finally, Eleanor spotted Daniel across the room, laughing with a group of men in bespoke suits. He looked undeniably handsome, successful, everything she had worked so hard to help him achieve. When he saw her, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he offered a brief, almost perfunctory wave. He excused himself and approached, his greeting a quick peck on her cheek that felt more like a duty than an embrace. "Mom, you made it," he said, his eyes already scanning the room for other guests. She held out the carefully wrapped package, a vintage first-edition novel by his favorite author, a gift she had spent months searching for and saving up to buy. "Happy birthday, my dear," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Daniel took it, glancing at the plain wrapping, and casually set it on a nearby table amidst other more extravagant-looking presents, barely registering its presence. The small gesture, though minor, twisted a familiar knot of disappointment in Eleanor's chest. Before she could even respond, Brooke glided over, her perfect smile unwavering, though her eyes held a predatory glint as they settled on Eleanor. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Brooke purred, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "This party wasn't cheap, you know. Another mouth to feed, I suppose." The words were delivered with a casual cruelty, a veiled insult designed to sting. Eleanor felt a hot flush creep up her neck, her hands clenching at her sides. She tried to formulate a response, something dignified, but the words caught in her throat. To her utter dismay, Daniel chuckled, a light, dismissive sound that affirmed his wife's biting remark. "She's right, Mom. Just another mouth to feed, right?" he said, his eyes meeting hers, devoid of any empathy. The laughter that accompanied his words was a betrayal, a dagger plunged into the heart of everything Eleanor had ever believed about their relationship. All the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the double shifts she'd worked to put him through school, flashed before her eyes, now rendered meaningless by his casual disdain. Brooke, emboldened by Daniel's complicity, leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was just loud enough to be overheard by a few nearby guests. "Honestly, you're like a pitiful old beggar at the feast, aren't you? Always reaching out, always expecting something." The veiled comparison to a pauper, openly humiliated at her own son's celebration, was a humiliation Eleanor felt to her very core. She looked at Daniel, her gaze pleading, silently begging him to intervene, to defend her honor, to remember all she had done. But he merely averted his eyes, a faint, uncomfortable smile still plastered on his face, choosing silence over loyalty, indifference over love. A wave of shame washed over Eleanor, quickly followed by a searing anger. Her son, for whom she had given up so much, stood by and allowed his wife to tear her down. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone in a room full of strangers and one heartless familiar face. Unable to bear the public spectacle another second, Eleanor turned, retreating to the nearest empty corner of the opulent ballroom, trying to make herself as invisible as possible, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. It was there, tucked away between a towering potted plant and a velvet curtain, that a tall, silver-haired man approached her. He had a distinguished bearing, eyes that seemed to hold a quiet intelligence, and a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of understated wealth. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice a low, resonant baritone. Eleanor blinked, surprised. Vance was her maiden name, a name she hadn't heard in decades. "Yes?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He offered a small, polite smile. "Eleanor Vance, I presume? My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm an attorney, and I've been searching for you for quite some time." He held out a thick manila envelope, its weight hinting at important contents. "It's time you learned the truth about who you really are, Mrs. Vance. And it's high time Daniel and Brooke learned too." Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the envelope. The implication of his words sent a shiver down her spine. "The truth? What truth?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the official-looking papers peeking from the top. "This contains your inheritance, Eleanor. From your grandmother, Sophia Rossi." The name felt distant, almost foreign. Eleanor had barely known Sophia, a consequence of a bitter family feud that had severed ties long before Eleanor was old enough to understand. Arthur continued, observing her reaction with an unreadable expression. "Sophia Rossi, your maternal grandmother, passed away several months ago. She was, shall we say, a rather private but exceptionally shrewd businesswoman. She left her entire estate, worth approximately $8.7 million, to you, Eleanor, as her sole heir." He paused, allowing the monumental figure to sink in. Properties, extensive investments, even a vineyard in Tuscany. Sophia ensured everything was managed meticulously. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I have observed your life from a distance for a long time, Eleanor. It seems to me you have been generous enough, long enough." His eyes held hers, a subtle yet profound message passing between them. The words hung in the air, hinting at a seismic shift, a turning point that promised to rewrite the very narrative of her life and, perhaps, the lives of those who had just so cruelly dismissed her. The morning light filtering through the worn kitchen window did little to brighten the mood in Eleanor's small home. She sat at her chipped formica table, surrounded by the contents of Arthur Sterling's manila envelope. Deeds, investment statements, bank records, all laid out like an impossible jigsaw puzzle. $8.7 million. The number swam before her eyes, a dizzying, unbelievable sum, starkly contrasting with the meager contents of her own bank account and the persistent hum of the old refrigerator. For decades, she had scrimped and saved, worried about every utility bill, every grocery purchase. Now, this. Her gaze drifted to a faded photograph on the fridge door, a smiling Daniel, perhaps 5 years old, his arm slung around her neck. A wave of memories washed over her, poignant and bitter. His father had died suddenly, tragically, when Daniel was just that age, leaving Eleanor with a mountain of grief and a shockingly small life insurance payout. They were left with practically nothing, just the small, mortgaged house and a future that stretched out uncertainly before them. Eleanor had been forced to become a warrior overnight. She took on 2 jobs, hostess and server at the local diner during the day, her feet aching from endless hours on the linoleum floor, and office cleaning at night, pushing heavy carts through deserted hallways long after everyone else had gone home. Daniel, too young for childcare, would sometimes sleep bundled on a blanket in the corner of the empty office while she scrubbed toilets and emptied trash bins, the rhythmic squeak of her mop a lullaby. She remembered his small, trusting face when he woke, the way his hand would instinctively reach for hers. In those early days, Daniel was a sweet, perceptive boy. He would sit beside her after her diner shift, painstakingly counting the meager tips she brought home, his small fingers carefully separating the coins. "We're a team, Mama," he would declare, his eyes wide with earnest affection. "You earn it, and I count it." Her heart ached, recalling his innocent pride. That innocent, loving boy felt like a ghost now. When had she stopped being his cherished teammate and started feeling like nothing more than a burden? A shadow to be tolerated. Her eyes fell upon a specific document, a detailed property deed for an apartment complex in a thriving part of the city, its value listed in the multi-millions. A cold, hard laugh escaped her lips, a sound devoid of humor. She had owned this. She, Eleanor Vance, the woman who had haggled over every dollar, who had worried about every unforeseen expense, who had lived a life of quiet desperation, had owned a multi-million-dollar asset while she struggled to keep food on the table. The irony was a cruel punch to the gut. A sharp memory surfaced, unbidden. Daniel was starting middle school, and he needed new clothes, not hand-me-downs from cousins. She remembered holding Sophia's antique wedding ring, a delicate silver band with a small, unpretentious pearl, in her palm. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned, a fragile link to a grandmother she barely knew. With a heavy heart, she had taken it to a pawn shop, receiving a paltry $400. When Daniel asked where it had gone, she had smiled sadly and lied, telling him she had misplaced it, knowing full well it was on the finger of a stranger somewhere, traded for her son's fleeting happiness. He never asked about it again. High school brought new expenses, new demands. Daniel wanted to fit in, to have the latest sneakers, to go on class trips. While he earned a little pocket money from a part-time job, it rarely went towards his school needs, instead funding his own leisure and social life. Eleanor, meanwhile, worked extra shifts, her body protesting the increased strain, and quietly sold off pieces of her modest furniture, an old dresser, a rarely used armchair, pretending she was simply decluttering. Each sale chipped away at her home, but more importantly, at her sense of self-worth. For Daniel's sake, college was the ultimate breaking point. He got into a good university, an accomplishment she swelled with pride over, but the financial burden was staggering. At 52, Eleanor took out a second mortgage on her small house, plunging herself deeper into debt, and began working a third job, cleaning houses on weekends. Her body screamed in protest, but her resolve to see Daniel succeed was unyielding. The phone calls from Daniel started soon after he left for college, always with the same underlying request. "Mom, I need money for textbooks," he would say. But she knew, deep down, that the textbooks funded weekend trips with friends, new gadgets, or emergencies that were never quite explained and never seemed to have real consequences. Each time, Eleanor sent what she could, often going without herself. His graduation day should have been a triumph for both of them. As he accepted his diploma, Daniel made a brief speech, acknowledging those who helped him. He pointed to her in the audience, a fleeting smile on his face. "And, of course," he announced to the crowd, "to the woman who made it all possible. Not my mother, but the woman." A function. A means to an end. It was a painful reduction, a casual erasure of their relationship, a stark reminder of where she stood in his life. After Daniel secured a marketing job, his financial requests didn't stop. They merely escalated, cloaked in different terms. He needed down payments for cars, loans for investments, money for a new apartment. Each time, Eleanor acquiesced, always believing this would be the last time, that one day he would finally be on his own 2 feet and remember her generosity. But the loans were never repaid, and the requests never ceased. Then came Brooke. Eleanor still remembered their first meeting. Brooke's perfectly sculpted brows rising in thinly veiled disdain as she took in Eleanor's practical clothing and unmanicured hands. Brooke's condescension was palpable, delivered with a syrupy politeness that made it even more cutting. Daniel, instead of defending his mother, would simply laugh, dismissing Eleanor's humble circumstances as a charming personality quirk, a quaint oddity that somehow made him more endearing. The final, crushing blow came with the wedding. Daniel and Brooke's dream wedding, a lavish affair that cost a staggering $43,000. Half of it, $21,500, came from Eleanor. through yet another loan against her house. She sat at a small, round table in the back of the reception hall, watching them dance, a stranger at her own son's most significant celebration. She had paid for her seat, but it bought her neither respect nor affection. Now, sitting in her quiet kitchen, the millions spread before her. A profound realization settled over Eleanor. She finally understood the difference between love and exploitation. She had confused her boundless love for Daniel with an endless obligation to his selfish demands. The pauper at the feast insult echoed in her mind. But this time, it fueled a quiet, steely resolve. No more. She didn't have to be that woman anymore. She wouldn't be. The elevator chimed softly, opening its doors to the 32nd floor of the gleaming downtown skyscraper. Eleanor stepped out, her best dress, a sensible navy blue, feeling suddenly inadequate amidst the hushed luxury of the law firm's reception area. The plush carpet swallowed her footsteps, and the modern art on the walls seemed to scrutinize her every move. She felt profoundly out of place, a small, faded picture in a grand, vibrant frame. Despite the unsettling opulence, a tremor of anticipation ran through her. This meeting with Arthur Sterling was the next step in unraveling the impossible reality of her new fortune. Before she could even announce herself to the impeccably dressed receptionist, Arthur Sterling emerged from a nearby office, a warm, welcoming smile on his face. He seemed to sense her apprehension, making her feel seen, despite the whirlwind of emotions churning within her. "Eleanor, thank you for coming," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, reassuring. "Please, come in. Make yourself comfortable." He led her down a quiet corridor to his private office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. As Eleanor settled into a plush leather armchair, her gaze drifted across the room. On a credenza behind Arthur's massive mahogany desk, a framed photograph caught her eye. It was of a woman, elegant and dignified, with Sophia Rossi's distinctive sharp features, standing amidst rows of lush grapevines, a gentle smile playing on her lips. It was her grandmother, Sophia, a figure she barely knew, immortalized in a setting that exuded quiet prosperity. "That's my grandmother," Eleanor stated, more to herself than to Arthur, a strange mix of reverence and confusion in her voice. "I barely knew her. I always thought our family was, well, struggling. My mother certainly was." How could Sophia have all this? The stark contrast between the woman in the photograph and the memories of her own family's meager existence was jarring. Her mother had lived a life of quiet sacrifice, similar to Eleanor's own, never hinting at such a wealthy lineage. Arthur nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Sophia Rossi was an extraordinary woman, Eleanor. Her husband, your grandfather, passed away when she was still relatively young, leaving her with a small, but respectable, construction business. Most people would have sold it, but Sophia saw potential. She didn't just maintain it, she expanded it, investing her profits wisely into real estate, diversified portfolios, and yes, that Sonoma County vineyard you see in the photo." He gestured to the picture. "She built a significant estate, piece by painstaking piece, over decades. She was incredibly private about her business affairs, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves." He then showed Eleanor a series of documents, property deeds stretching back through the years, detailing the acquisition of various commercial properties, residential complexes, and finally, the sprawling vineyard. Each document represented a piece of Sophia's meticulous, quiet empire building, a life of strategic planning completely unknown to her family. But then, why was my own mother, Sophia's daughter, so poor? Eleanor asked, a flicker of resentment mingling with her confusion. If my grandmother was so wealthy, why did my mother struggle so much? Why did we struggle? Arthur's gaze softened, a hint of sadness in his eyes. That, Eleanor, is a more complicated story. A painful one. There was a significant family falling out many years ago, before you were even born. Your mother, Sophia's daughter, made certain choices that Sophia, as traditional as she was, found difficult to support. Sophia, out of love, tried to help, to offer financial assistance, But your mother was fiercely independent, even stubborn. She refused any help, cutting all ties with Sophia. It was a deep, intractable rift that neither woman ever truly mended. Eleanor remembered her mother, a woman who had carried a deep-seated bitterness within her, a quiet ache that she rarely spoke of, but which permeated their home. Whenever Eleanor, as a child, had innocently asked about her grandparents, her mother would simply clam up, changing the subject with a weary sigh. Now, the pieces began to fall into place, revealing a decades-old wound. Sophia never stopped loving her daughter, Eleanor, Arthur clarified, as if sensing Eleanor's unspoken questions. She respected your mother's choice, however much it pained her. But when it came to her will, Sophia was very clear. Everything was to go to you, her only grandchild, Eleanor Vance. She wanted her legacy to continue through you. But why did it take so long? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. 15 years, you said, since she passed away? Arthur leaned back, steepling his fingers. Indeed. Sophia passed 15 years ago. But you, Eleanor, disappeared. After you married, you changed your name from Vance to Peterson, moved frequently, never staying in one place for very long. Finding you became a monumental task. Sophia's will was explicit. The inheritance could only go to Eleanor Vance. Not Eleanor Peterson, not Eleanor Smith, but Eleanor Vance, he continued. We searched diligently for years. It was an extensive investigation, cross-referencing public records, old addresses, anything we could find. The breakthrough came about 6 months ago. We finally found your current address through property tax records, where, for insurance purposes, your full legal name, Eleanor Vance Peterson, was listed. That was the missing link. From there, it was a relatively straightforward matter to verify your identity and finally reach out to you. Eleanor listened, her mind reeling. The sheer scale of it, the decades of searching, the millions that had been waiting for her while she struggled, all because of a forgotten maiden name and a family feud she knew nothing about. It felt utterly surreal, a dream from which she expected to wake at any moment. I still can't believe it, she confessed, shaking her head. It feels like a mistake, like it belongs to someone else. The weight of this unexpected legacy, intertwined with the ghosts of her family's past, settled heavily upon her shoulders. Arthur Sterling reached across his desk, his hand holding a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a delicate wax impression. Sophia left explicit instructions regarding her inheritance, he said, his voice quiet. But more importantly, she left this. A personal letter, meant only for you. Eleanor took the envelope, her fingers tracing the elegant, looping script of her name Eleanor Vance written on the front. It was the same distinctive handwriting she'd seen on some of the older property documents, a beautiful, almost artistic flourish that spoke of a bygone era. The paper felt aged, brittle, as if holding a story that had been waiting patiently for decades to be told. Her heart throbbed with a strange mix of apprehension and deep curiosity. This wasn't just a letter. It was a voice from the past, a message from a grandmother she barely knew, yet who seemed to know her intimately. With trembling hands, Eleanor broke the seal and carefully unfolded the single, heavy sheet of paper. The date at the top, 6 months before Sophia's death, confirmed it had been written with great intention and foresight. She began to read, her eyes scanning the familiar script, suddenly feeling a profound connection to the woman in the vineyard photograph. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began, the words seeming to resonate in the silent office. If you are reading this, then you have finally learned what I always hoped you would discover, that you are worth so much more than you believe. A gasp escaped Eleanor's lips, tears pricking at her eyes almost immediately. Sophia knew. She had known all along, somehow, about the deep-seated insecurity, the quiet self-doubt that Eleanor had carried for so long. The letter continued, Sophia's elegant voice echoing in Eleanor's mind. She explained how she had watched Eleanor's mother, her own daughter, struggle with a crippling pride that prevented her from accepting any help, leading to a life of unnecessary hardship. Sophia had vowed not to let the same fate befall Eleanor, but she also knew that simply bestowing wealth would not teach her self-worth. Eleanor's vision blurred as tears streamed down her face, the words blurring on the page. Sophia's letter acknowledged her sacrifices, her quiet endurance, the pain she had silently carried. It was as if Sophia had been there all along, a silent witness to Eleanor's life. The letter spoke of her difficult childhood, her resilience, the tireless efforts she made for her son. It confirmed, without explicitly stating it, that Sophia had indeed been watching, not just through legal investigators, but perhaps through distant relatives, piecing together the narrative of Eleanor's life. The letter went on to detail the properties, the investments, the vineyard, but it was the emotional insight, the profound understanding of Eleanor's life that struck her most deeply. Sophia wasn't just leaving money, she was leaving a message, a legacy of wisdom. "I suspect," Sophia had written, her words piercing through Eleanor's defenses, "that by the time you receive this inheritance, you will have learned the difference between love and exploitation." Eleanor choked back a sob. Sophia truly understood. She understood the crushing weight of Daniel's demands, the casual dismissals, the cold indifference that had masqueraded as love for so long. Sophia continued, her words a gentle yet firm lesson. "Real love is mutual, Eleanor. It respects your worth. It does not demand endless sacrifice, nor does it take without giving. If those around you cannot see your worth, cannot reciprocate your kindness and generosity, then you must have the courage to treasure yourself, to protect your own heart." A chilling realization washed over Eleanor. Sophia had known about Daniel. She had known about the subtle cruelty, the constant draining of Eleanor's resources, both emotional and financial. She knew Eleanor's struggles hadn't been just about money, but about a deeper, more painful betrayal. Arthur, who had been quietly observing Eleanor, spoke softly. Sophia was incredibly perceptive. "Eleanor," she understood her daughter's fierce pride, and she did not want you to make the same mistakes, nor to raise a child who would exploit your good nature. Eleanor wiped her tears with the back of her hand, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "But I did, didn't I?" she muttered, her voice raw. "I did raise that child." The guilt of it, the realization of her own enabling, was almost unbearable. Arthur leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "And now, you have the power to solve it. This inheritance, Eleanor, comes with no strings attached, no conditions. Sophia wanted you to be free, free to help Daniel, if you choose, or free to build an entirely new life for yourself, one where your worth is truly recognized and celebrated." She returned her gaze to the letter, reading Sophia's powerful conclusion, a message that felt like a liberation. "Do not let guilt or obligation cloud your judgment, my dear Eleanor. You have earned the right to put yourself first. You have given enough. Your future is now yours to shape. If those around you cannot learn to treat you with the dignity you deserve, then you have the resources to find people who will." The final sentence resonated deeply within her, a profound shift occurring in her perception of herself and her future. For the first time in a very long time, Eleanor felt a stirring of something new. Not just grief for what was lost, nor anger for what was taken, but a powerful, quiet resolve. Sophia's words were not just a gift of wealth, they were a gift of self-permission, a mandate to reclaim her own life. If you're finding Eleanor's story as compelling as I am, please make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single part of her journey. There's so much more to come, and I promise you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Eleanor sat in the hushed elegance of Arthur Sterling's office, Sophia's letter clutched in her hand. The profound legacy of her grandmother, both in wealth and wisdom, settled over her. It wasn't just about the millions. It was about the path to her own liberation, a revelation that she had the power to redefine her life. After a long moment of silence, absorbing the weight of it all, Eleanor looked up at Arthur, a new resolve hardening her gaze. "I need to understand everything," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "All the properties, the investments, and I want to know Daniel's true financial position." What exactly have I been sacrificing for? Arthur nodded slowly, a knowing look in his eyes. I anticipated that request, Eleanor. He reached into a drawer and pulled out another thick file, placing it on the desk. I've had an investigative team compile a discreet report on Daniel and Brooke's finances. It's quite comprehensive. Eleanor took the report, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and grim curiosity. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. The detailed figures painted a stark picture of financial recklessness. Daniel and Brooke had been living far beyond their means, maintaining an illusion of wealth that was crumbling beneath a mountain of debt. Credit card statements showed tens of thousands of dollars in outstanding balances. Their mortgage was underwater, and their luxury car payments were clearly unaffordable. They were trapped in a gilded cage of their own making. They've been maintaining this lifestyle through a continuous cycle of loans, new credit lines, and ever-increasing debt, Arthur explained, his voice devoid of judgment. Essentially, they've been buying time, fully expecting to inherit money from you someday. The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow, a cold, hard truth that twisted the knife of betrayal. They expected to inherit money from her. It wasn't just about taking what she offered. They believed she had hidden wealth, that she was merely a means to their continued extravagance, and that her eventual demise would be their financial salvation. They weren't just exploiting her love, they were waiting for her to die. The thought made her stomach churn. And it seems, Arthur added, his gaze softening slightly, their house is scheduled for foreclosure next month. They're 3 payments behind. Eleanor stared at the report, the full weight of their desperation and her own newfound power crashing down on her. She held all the cards. Every single one. A complex mix of anger, sorrow, and a strange sense of vindication swirled within her. I need some time to think, she managed, her voice a little hoarse. Arthur nodded. Take all the time you need, Eleanor. But remember Sophia's words. Don't let guilt or obligation take away your choices now. This is your life, your legacy. For the next 2 weeks, Eleanor lived in a peculiar limbo. Outwardly, nothing in her life changed. She still worked her diner shifts, still cleaned offices at night, still returned to her small, quiet house. But inwardly, she was transformed. The old anxieties had been replaced by a quiet hum of power, a simmering resolve. She carefully placed the original inheritance documents in a newly acquired safety deposit box, but she carried copies with her, a tangible reminder of the monumental shift in her reality. Arthur's detailed report became her constant companion. She reread the grim statistics of Daniel and Brooke's financial ruin countless times. $87,000 in credit card debt, 4 months behind on their mortgage, their home equity loan teetering on the brink. She saw how they strategically used new credit to pay off old, a house of cards ready to collapse. The report even included snippets from conversations, gleaned from anonymous sources, where Daniel and Brooke casually mentioned Mom's eventual inheritance, often inflating the figure to a cool $500,000. Eleanor couldn't help but note the bitter irony. They were so convinced she was hiding money, so certain she had a secret nest egg they were entitled to. Little did they know, she actually had inherited nearly $9 million, a fortune beyond their wildest dreams, and one they knew absolutely nothing about. The secret was hers now, a powerful weapon. During a rare quiet moment at the diner, on her lunch break, Eleanor pulled out her phone. She hesitated for only a second before dialing Daniel's number. It rang several times before he answered, his voice initially harried. Mom? Everything okay? Yes, Daniel. Everything's fine, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. I was wondering if you and Brooke would be free for dinner this coming Saturday. There are some financial things I need to discuss with you both. There was a noticeable pause on the other end, then Daniel's tone shifted dramatically, a sudden warmth seeping into his voice that Eleanor hadn't heard in years. Oh, sure, Mom. Absolutely. Saturday sounds great. Is everything all right? Do you need help with something? The quick assumption that she was the one in need, that her financial things meant she required assistance, only fueled Eleanor's quiet determination. He was already thinking of how to extract, not how to help. Perfect, Eleanor said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. I'll text you the address. It's a new place I thought we could try. 7 o'clock. She hung up, a sense of quiet anticipation settling over her. The stage was set. The drive to Daniel's affluent neighborhood felt different this time. Instead of the usual pang of inadequacy, Eleanor felt a quiet sense of purpose. She drove past his manicured lawn, slowing as she approached the impressive, though slightly neglected, colonial house. Taped to the glossy front door, an ugly splash of color against the pristine white, was a bright yellow foreclosure notice. Her heart gave a small, grim lurch of confirmation. Arthur's report hadn't exaggerated. She watched from a discreet distance as Brooke's luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Brooke, impeccably dressed as always, stepped out, spotted the notice, and with a quick, furious glance around, ripped it off the door, crumpling it into a tight ball before disappearing inside. The illusion of prosperity, Eleanor observed, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by a piece of paper. The sight solidified Eleanor's resolve. That evening, Eleanor meticulously planned her strategy for Saturday. Every word, every gesture, every document placement was carefully considered. The revelation had to appear natural, reluctant, almost a burden she was reluctantly sharing. She wanted them to believe she was truly giving them the whole, albeit limited, picture. Saturday arrived, a gray, drizzly day that matched the somber tone Eleanor cultivated for the evening. The aroma of her famous pot roast, a dish Daniel once adored, filled her small kitchen. On the dining table, beside plates set with her best, though mismatched, china, she arranged a carefully curated folder of documents. These were her chosen props for the evening's performance. Promptly at 7, the doorbell rang. Daniel and Brooke. Eleanor opened the door, a faint smile on her face. To her surprise, Daniel stepped forward and hugged her, a seemingly genuine gesture, though she knew its roots lay in his expectation of what was to come. "Mom, it's so good to see you," he said, his voice laced with an unfamiliar warmth. Brooke, however, merely offered a curt nod, her eyes already sweeping across Eleanor's humble living room with an undisguised disdain that belied her polite facade. "Lovely place, Eleanor," she said, her tone dripping with passive aggression. During dinner, Eleanor made small talk, asking about their work and their friends. Neither Daniel nor Brooke brought up their glaring financial troubles, maintaining the pretense of their lavish lifestyle. They ate heartily, praising the pot roast, their conversation light and superficial, dancing around the unspoken reason for their visit. Eleanor let the silence stretch after the main course, allowing the anticipation to build. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat, setting down his fork. "Mom, you mentioned on the phone that you wanted to discuss some financial matters?" he prompted, his eyes suddenly bright with interest. Eleanor dabbed her mouth with her napkin, feigning a moment of thoughtful hesitation. "Yes, dear. It's just that, well, your birthday party. Watching you and Brooke there, it made me think about life and planning ahead. I'm not getting any younger, and I want to make sure everything is in order, should anything happen to me." She glanced at Brooke, whose perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face as the birthday party was mentioned. The memory of her cruel words, Eleanor knew, was still fresh. "It's just about my assets," Eleanor continued, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. "And what will happen to them when I'm gone? I know we never really talked about this, but your father and we actually made some good investments years ago. Nothing extravagant, but I've been managing them quietly. Didn't want to make a fuss." It was a carefully constructed half-truth, weaving in a sliver of her actual newfound wealth with her fabricated modest savings. Daniel was now hanging on her every word, his full attention finally captured. Eleanor rose from the table, excusing herself briefly. She returned with the carefully prepared folder, its contents a stark contrast to the millions she truly possessed. She laid it on the table, opening it to reveal what looked like legitimate financial statements. "I have a modest savings account," she began, gesturing to a document, "and a small certificate of deposit. Combined, they amount to about $200,000. She paused, letting the figure sink in. "And then there's my life insurance policy, which would pay out about $150,000. Daniel's face, which had initially been alight with expectation, slowly fell. His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. Eleanor could practically see him doing the mental math. 200,000 plus 150,000. It wasn't the $500,000 he'd clearly been hoping for, let alone the larger sums Brooke might have whispered about. Disappointment was etched clearly on his features. Brooke, too, looked less than impressed, a slight frown marring her perfect composure. And then, of course, there's the house, Eleanor added casually, gesturing vaguely around her small, well-kept home. My mother's house, which I inherited, as you know. This, again, was technically true. Her current house, which she had thought was hers, was actually part of Sophia's vast, unmanaged estate. It's been valued recently, and it's worth about $400,000. Now Daniel's eyes widened slightly. 400,000, plus the 350,000. His brain worked quickly, his disappointment giving way to renewed interest. That brought the total up to roughly $750,000, not the millions he fantasized about, but certainly enough to salvage their dire financial situation. Brooke's expression softened, a glint of relief in her eyes. "Oh," she said, a little too quickly. "That's very good, Eleanor. Very generous. So, when would all of this be resolved?" The question, thinly veiled, was clearly about accessing the money as soon as possible. Eleanor met her gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Well, dear," she said, her voice still gentle, "that's precisely what I wanted to discuss tonight." The hook was set. After Daniel and Brooke finally left, the silence in Eleanor's small house felt deafening. She sat at the dining table, picking at the remnants of pot roast, replaying every moment of the evening. Daniel's eagerness, thinly veiled beneath a veneer of polite conversation, had been painfully transparent. Brooke's calculating glances, her quick mental arithmetic, confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. Her heart ached with a familiar, searing pain, but beneath it, a steely resolve had solidified. She was heartbroken, yes, but no longer blind. The next morning, Eleanor called Arthur Sterling. "I'm ready for the next phase, Arthur," she announced, her voice firm. "I want to know every detail about Daniel and Brooke's debts. Every single one." 3 weeks later, the call came, exactly as Eleanor had anticipated. Daniel's name flashed on her phone screen, and she took a deep breath before answering. His voice, usually so composed and even-toned, was now strained, tinged with panic. "Mom, it's really bad," he stammered, his usual bravado completely gone. "The house, it's foreclosing. We have 30 days, Mom. 30 days to come up with $68,000 for back payments, penalties, and legal fees." He paused, then added in a desperate rush, "Brooke is losing her mind. Her parents aren't returning our calls. They've cut us off." The implication was clear. The well of external support had finally run dry, and Eleanor was their last, desperate hope. Then came the reluctant, almost choked, request for help. "Mom, please. I know you mentioned your savings and the inheritance from Grandma's house. Could you help us? Just this once. I promise. I'll pay you back. Every penny." Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. She recognized the desperation, the forced humility in his voice, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years of exploitation, the casual cruelty at his birthday party, or any of the countless times he had taken without a second thought. It was pure self-interest, raw and undisguised. She felt the familiar weight of his expectations settle on her shoulders, a crushing pressure that used to compel her to immediately agree, to sacrifice whatever it took. The old Eleanor would have emptied her accounts, taken out another loan without question. But the new Eleanor, armed with Sophia's wisdom and nearly $9 million, was different. "Daniel," she said, her voice calm, a stark contrast to his frantic tone. "This is a serious amount of money. I need some time to think about it, and I'll need to consult my financial advisor." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Your financial advisor?" Daniel finally sputtered, clearly surprised by this unexpected hurdle. "What do you mean, Financial advisor. Mom, you've never had a financial advisor. Well, I do now, Eleanor replied, allowing a hint of mild exasperation into her voice. These are significant assets, Daniel. I can't just make snap decisions. I'll get back to you. And with that, she gently ended the call, leaving him in stunned confusion. Later that day, Eleanor met Arthur. She confessed to him. Part of me still wants to save him, Arthur. He's my son, despite everything. The conflict was palpable, a war between decades of ingrained maternal instinct and her newfound clarity. Arthur looked at her with understanding. And the other part remembers. Just another mouth to feed, doesn't it? He prompted gently. Eleanor, your past rescues, however well-intentioned, never taught Daniel responsibility. They only taught him that you would always be there to pick up the pieces, no matter how reckless he became. His words were a mirror, reflecting a painful truth she had long avoided. That evening, as if on cue, Brooke called. Her voice was tight with thinly veiled panic, a sharp edge replacing her usual polished calm. Eleanor, what are you doing? She demanded, skipping any pleasantries. Daniel told me you're thinking about it. We don't have time to think. The bank is serious. We're looking at bankruptcy, Eleanor. Homelessness. Our social standing. Everything we've worked for. Gone. Brooke launched into a dramatic picture of impending financial ruin, painting herself and Daniel as victims of circumstance, not their own extravagance. Family comes first, Eleanor, she pressed, injecting a tone of moral indignation into her voice. A good mother, a good grandmother, would risk her own security to help her family in a crisis like this. Don't you care about Daniel? About our future? Eleanor listened patiently, Brooke's words washing over her without their usual sting. The guilt-tripping, the implied accusations of heartlessness. It was all so transparent. Brooke, I understand the gravity of the situation, Eleanor said, her voice calm, refusing to rise to the bait. But as I told Daniel, this is a very serious matter. I need to consult with my financial advisor about the best course of action. I can't just hand over that kind of money without careful consideration. A financial advisor? Brooke shrieked, her composure finally cracking. What financial advisor? This is ridiculous. We need an answer now, Eleanor. This isn't some game. I'll let you know as soon as I've spoken with him, Brooke, Eleanor responded, her voice unwavering. Goodbye for now. She hung up, a strange sense of calm settling over her. The desperation in their voices was a validation, a confirmation that her plan was working. The phone call with Brooke ended, leaving Eleanor with a quiet sense of finality. She hadn't made her decision out of anger or spite, but from a place of profound clarity. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about consequences, about a painful but necessary lesson. Daniel and Brooke needed to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, something Eleanor's constant rescues had inadvertently prevented. This was for them, as much as it was for her. The next morning, with a calm heart, Eleanor called Daniel. She knew this conversation would be difficult, perhaps even ugly, but she was prepared. Daniel, she began, her voice steady. I've spoken with my financial advisor about your situation. I'm afraid I can't help you with the full $68,000. She paused, letting the words sink in. Most of my savings aren't liquid. As it turns out, they're tied up in long-term investments. I simply don't have that kind of cash readily available. On the other end, Daniel's voice rose, sharp with anger and disbelief. What? You can't? Mom, this is ridiculous. How can you say that? I'm your son. Everything we've been through. You're a 40-year-old man, Daniel, Eleanor retorted, her voice firm, refusing to be drawn into his emotional manipulations. You're more than capable of solving your own problems. This isn't fair, Daniel exploded, his tone laced with outrage. After everything I've done, everything we've been through, I've been a good son. Eleanor felt a cold calm settle over her. This was her moment. Her chance to speak truths that had festered for years. A good son, Daniel? She challenged. her voice rising slightly. Is that what you call it? Because I remember you, at your birthday party, laughing along with Brooke when she called me just another mouth to feed. I remember you standing by, silent, while she compared me to a pitiful old beggar. I remember countless times you called, not to check on me, but always with your hand out, asking for money, taking without a shred of gratitude. The line was silent. Eleanor pressed on. How many times, Daniel, have you called me just to say hello, to ask how I was doing, without needing something? How many times have you and Brooke visited me without needing a loan or a favor? Silence. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. I love you, Daniel, Eleanor continued, her voice softening, but remaining resolute. But I will not enable your irresponsibility any longer. You and Brooke created this mess with your choices, and you must find your own way out of it. The silence on Daniel's end stretched, thick with unspoken resentment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, devoid of any warmth. Fine, he said, his words clipped. Then don't expect our help when you need it, Mom. Don't come crying to us. The threat, subtle but clear, revealed the transactional nature of his view of family, stripping away any last illusions Eleanor might have harbored. 2 weeks later, Arthur called Eleanor. They lost the house, Eleanor, he informed her gently. The foreclosure went through. Daniel and Brooke are currently living with friends, trying to figure out their next steps. He paused. But there's something else. Daniel has taken a second job, and Brooke has secured a full-time position. It seems they're both learning to live within their means, for the first time in a long time. Eleanor felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the loss, for the brokenness of their relationship, but an overwhelming sense of freedom. She was no longer responsible for fixing his problems, no longer tied to the endless cycle of his demands. For the first time, she was truly prioritizing her own needs, her own peace of mind. 6 months passed, a period of unexpected tranquility. There was no contact from Daniel or Brooke. Arthur occasionally provided updates. They were still with friends, still working hard, slowly rebuilding their lives from the ground up. In this newfound peace, Eleanor began to truly explore her inheritance. She visited the Sonoma County vineyard, walking among the vibrant rows of grapes, feeling a tangible connection to Sophia. She toured the apartment complexes, learning about the careful management and steady growth of her grandmother's portfolio. She spent hours with Arthur, poring over investment strategies, finally understanding the true scale of what Sophia had built. During these months, Eleanor found herself reflecting deeply on the meaning of family. It wasn't about blood, not exclusively. It was about respect, mutual support, and genuine affection. She wondered if, perhaps, through this difficult process, broken relationships could be repaired. Not through endless sacrifice, but through clarity and honest boundaries. One quiet Thursday evening in November, just as Eleanor was settling down with a book, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated, but something compelled her to answer. Hello, Eleanor? My name is Amanda. I'm Daniel's girlfriend. The voice was soft, gentle, and utterly unfamiliar. Eleanor's heart gave a jolt. Girlfriend? Not Brooke? Daniel and Brooke divorced about 2 months ago, Amanda explained, as if reading Eleanor's thoughts. I'm calling because Daniel, he had a mild heart attack earlier today. He's at Street Jude's. He's asking for you, Eleanor, but he's too proud to call himself. Eleanor felt a cold wave of shock, followed by a surge of maternal panic she hadn't realized was still dormant. A heart attack? Daniel? Her hands began to shake as she pulled on her coat, grabbing her car keys. The tension between them had been immense, the silence heavy, but the thought of her son, vulnerable and alone in a hospital bed, was enough to override everything else. She navigated the city streets on autopilot, her mind racing, preparing herself for whatever lay ahead. She found him in room 417, pale against the stark white sheets, a tangle of wires connected to monitors. He looked fragile, so unlike the confident, often arrogant man she knew. His eyes flickered open as she entered, widening slightly in surprise. Mom? You came? His voice was weak, raspy. Eleanor approached the bed, her own voice thick with emotion. Of course I came, Daniel. She sat in the chair beside him, reaching out to gently touch his hand. He let out a weak, self-deprecating laugh. I feel like such an idiot, Mom. The doctors said it was stress-related. The house, Brooke, losing everything. It all just piled up. He gestured vaguely. I guess I finally hit rock bottom. He then introduced Amanda, who was quietly observing from the corner of the room. Amanda's a nurse here. She's different from Brooke. Doesn't care about status or expensive things. She just cares about people. Amanda offered Eleanor a kind, gentle smile. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. It was a silence filled with unspoken truths, with years of hurt and regret. Finally, Daniel took a deep breath. Mom, he began, his voice hoarse. I was wrong. About everything. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw honesty Eleanor hadn't seen in years. I was cruel to you. I took you for granted. I used you. The words were like a balm to Eleanor's wounded heart, a profound admission she had yearned to hear for so long. He continued. When you didn't help us with the house, I was furious. I hated you for it. But now I understand. You weren't being mean. You were teaching me about consequences, about responsibility. It was the hardest lesson I ever had to learn. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. Saying no to you, Daniel, she whispered, her voice cracking, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It broke my heart. I know it must have, he replied, his own eyes glistening. For taking advantage of your love, for letting Brooke say those awful things at my birthday party, for only calling you when I needed something, for everything. Eleanor simply nodded, her tears a silent acceptance of his apology. Daniel then looked towards Amanda, a grateful expression on his face. Amanda was horrified when I told her how I'd treated you, he confessed. She made me see that I had to apologize, not to get anything from you, but because it was the right thing to do. She said I couldn't move forward until I made things right with the person I hurt the most. Eleanor took a shaky breath, then looked at her son. A profound decision made in that moment. Daniel, she began. There's something I need to tell you. Something you don't know. And then, she told him everything. About Arthur Sterling, about Sophia Rossi, about the family feud, and about the $8.7 million inheritance, the properties, the vineyard. Daniel listened, his pale face growing even paler, his eyes wide with shock. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, processing the enormity of her revelation. You mean you could have helped us? He finally whispered, his voice incredulous. You had almost $9 million, and you let us lose everything? He looked at her, and Eleanor braced herself for the anger, the accusation. But instead, a strange expression of relief, almost awe, washed over his face. Wow, he breathed. Mom, I don't blame you. Not at all. You were right. We needed that lesson. I needed it. Eleanor reached for his hand, clutching it tightly. The money doesn't erase the past. Daniel, she said, her voice gentle. Only our choices moving forward can do that. He squeezed her hand. I promise, Mom, he said, his voice imbued with a newfound sincerity. I'm going to be the son you always deserved. Not for the money, but for myself. For you, for a real second chance. Eleanor looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time in years, and felt a fragile, hopeful warmth blossom in her chest. A new life, not just for her, but perhaps for their family, had finally begun.